I'm happy to welcome you to a feedback webinar. It's a feedback webinar in the context of our policy called Safe and Sustainable by Design. On the 22nd of March, we had a large workshop with many participants, with many questions. On today, we would like to take 2 hours to give you feedback. If I refer to feedback, it's in particular our colleagues from the Joint Research Center, the GRC. And maybe I hope they're all there because we have here Serenella Sala, who will start with an introduction. Then we have Carla Caldera, we have Lucian Farsal and Iranzo Germania, who will take you until 4:30 through a set of slides. If they finish earlier, build on the comments received last time. However, we do not want to repeat now for a second time an online webinar with plenty of questions in the chat box or very detailed questions. That's a bit where we are, so that you feel what has actually happened on the 22nd of March or what has happened afterwards. Therefore, I think today the 4 colleagues from the Joint Research Center will take you through the various slides. Could you also, that would be my suggestion to you, in terms of having a good connectivity, keep your cameras and your microphones off. And I will do it also after I've handed over to the Joint Research Center. For the 2 hours, as I said, it's planned that until around 4:30 or maybe a bit earlier, the colleagues from the Joint Research Center will give you an introduction, an overview of what they have done with all the comments. As I said, it was a very rich workshop last time, and would like now just to give you feedback today. There is then 10-15 minutes for questions. We felt it would also be useful thereafter to foresee a short overview on a parallel work stream. It's a so-called transition pathway. It's a transition pathway for the chemical industries, for chemicals. And a colleague from DG Grow, Amadine Juanes, will share with us her insights for 10 minutes. Main purpose is that you are aware of it, that you feel reassured this is a complementary work. The Commission services are talking to each other. Slight smile if you allow me, but that you really see it's fitting together. And by 5 p.m. I would like then to close this session with my remarks at the end. And it's worthwhile staying until the end because then we come to timelines and what will the Commission actually do. Good. Without further introductory remarks on my side, yeah, we would like also to know we are recording now here this session, of course, as I was indicating to you. For raising your hand, yeah, you can do it. You can raise your hand or you put it into the chat box, whatever suits you best. You can do it during the 1.5 hours of presentations, but please wait maybe until the end before you come with questions, because a lot will be answered in the course of the presentations. Good. That is all what I would like to indicate to you in operational terms on this session. So it's more a feedback webinar, and I'm very happy that we have more than 100 participants here. So I'm looking at you, Serenella Sala. Are you with us?
Yes, I hope you can see me. I left the video on.
Now I can see you. Yes,
okay, good.
Good to see you. Okay, Serenella, over to you and over to your colleagues. That is now a little marathon. I think you have done a great job. Many thanks, Serenella, for being there. And then you just hand over to the other colleagues as well.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome also from my side to the webinar. Just a few words of introduction. We will have a number of colleagues presenting individual part and section of this presentation. Next slide, Carla, please. We receive a number of comments that were starting from general comments on use and scope, and then going very much in the details of the different section of the report that we have presented to you last time in our webinar. So we decided basically to organize the feedback back in terms of the way we were addressing these comments in the same structured manner, so covering basically the dimension cover, the hierarchy, and the stepwise approach, the comments we receive on the design principle and the innovation, and then on the sustainability assessment component. So for each individual step that has been proposed in the framework, we have a number of punctual comments received, and let's say the way we are again addressing and proposing to move forward. Then there is a section on the evaluation procedure and on the data. Next slide. We really are very grateful for the number of inputs received. First of all, because they were really very constructive. We received input from more than 50 stakeholders, so more than 800 different comments. In many cases, not only were shared comments, but also put forward interesting ideas for enriching the report, and any way to enrich the framework as we had designed it, but also proposing collaboration for case studies. And we were also organizing a number of follow-up meetings. Some were already happening and others are scheduled on specific topics. So as you can see from the distribution of the type of stakeholder, also the type of input were quite various in terms of the actors that were contributing. So without let's say further ado, I will move then to the contribution starting from my colleagues Carla Caldeira on the general comments we received on the use and scope. So Carla, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. So as Serenella said, we received many useful comments, and there were quite a few requesting for clarity on the use and the scope of the framework, and also the relation with other initiatives. So already we mentioned during the workshop last time that this work that we are currently doing is to support the design and development of safe and sustainable chemicals and materials within research and innovation activities. So this is the main focus of this work for now, and it's the idea that the Horizon Europe will continue supporting the development of this framework in the next work program. And so the first application will be to be used as a common reference in Horizon calls to ensure a coherent and harmonized methodology for the assessment of safety and sustainability of chemicals and materials across research and innovation projects that are funded by the EU. And so regarding these, the research outputs that will be generated by implementing this framework and criteria will then feed into relevant EU policies and initiatives that are also somehow related with the development of safe and sustainable criteria for chemicals and materials, such as the Sustainable Product Initiative or the Sustainable Textile Strategies. It's important to note that both of these initiatives are ongoing, so it's not so straightforward to say right now how things will be interlinked, but for sure we have that in the radar, and so this will be taken into account. And so to facilitate, so now that we produced this framework that we presented you and that we improved based on your comments, we will get into a stage of testing. So we will do a first test now with a case study that we will present you in a future workshop. But we foresee an extension of this project that will be used to test more case studies. And so this is to facilitate voluntary uptake of the framework by industry, and also to identify what are the bottlenecks when someone tries to use it, and to then define what measures could be put to address them, or if there is specific research needs, it can be that they are included in future Horizon calls. So this is an overview of the clarification regarding the use in scope that we included in the introduction, so a bit more clear regarding to this point. Then there was also a request for an innovative, flexible, adaptive, and dynamic policy approach, so that the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework should not only focus on criteria to assess environmental and health impact of substances, chemicals and materials, but should also inherently stimulate continuous improvement. So in the way we put the framework, we already consider this continuous improvement by the fact that we provide criteria to evaluate the chemicals and materials, and we were suggesting to have a scoring system that would allow to rank them. And so this ranking would allow to identify which ones would need to be improved. So in the end, we see the practical application of the framework that could be used in the alternative assessment and support the design of chemicals and materials and redesign of process for existing ones. But also we see it very much as a continuous improvement procedure that might go hand in hand with the innovation process, or that can be used, that can be used as a basis of a chemical sustainability management scheme in which you identify the hotspots, set actions for improvement, evaluate, and reiterate. So this is also something that we clarified in the report now. There was some request for clarification on the application of the framework to mixtures. And so for us, we know that we may encounter some difficulties when applying it to a case study dealing with this. But for us, the framework can be applied to a mixture. So the mixture that is composed of two or more substances can be the chemical or material to be assessed under the framework. Or on the other way, it can be also the result of the assessment of its individual components. So we will also further test this assessment, and then improve it if needed. There was so then a few comments questioning the applicability of the framework, in particular to new substances, also the practicability, because it was considered that was overly ambitious. So there was some comments mentioning the difficulty in applying this framework. But we consider that it's important that the framework contains all these elements that we are suggesting, and we will be applying it in the research and innovation setting. So the applicability will be tested with these case studies, and again, identifying research needs that will improve the applicability. So in case that we identify some bottlenecks as difficulties, this can be set in action to address those. Then there was some concerns regarding how to address chemicals that are used downstream in many applications. So if you recall, in the SSBD framework, we would have, the SSBD would be applied to a specific function. So this is also a requirement that we have in the framework aligned with the chemical strategy. So this is then become difficult when you have a chemical or material that then will have immense studies, immense uses. So in this case, we would consider that the cradle to gate can be done. Cradle to gate meaning you do the sustainability assessment up to the gate of the factory, and then this information could be included in the traceability system to be used by downstream users in their assessment when they do the specific use they are giving to that chemical or material. But in this case, the chemical or material would never be defined as SSVD. And so another alternative that we could find that we also would like to explore with the case study is to identify the most problematic applications of that chemical and material, and then conduct the assessment for those. So we are aware of also this challenge that we would like to test in a specific case study, and to see what of these two options could be possible to further explore, considering that the SSVD needs to take into account the entire life cycle of the chemical of the, or material. Then we had many comments supporting the inclusion of socioeconomic dimensions. And regarding to this, we are, the Commission is reflecting on the inclusion of these aspects. And so if we will see what in the end will be decided at a more higher level. And we had some comments supporting the hierarchical approach. So if you recall, the framework suggests that safety is assessed first, and then we have within the safety component some cutoff criteria, meaning that we don't accept that certain properties are in the new chemical or material. And we had some comments supporting this approach, some others opposing. The ones that were opposing were mainly saying that this will limit the innovation process, because normally the assessment should be done in parallel. And then if you identify some issues, you can go back and reiterate and improve. So we consider that this hierarchical procedure, including the cutoff, to be in line with the strategy ambition. So we keep it in any case. And we clarify that although we were having this hierarchical approach, and that was reflected in the stepwise approach, it's up to the developer to conduct the assessment of each step simultaneously or sequential. So this is something that there's flexibility for the application. The idea that we had when we defined this step approach was also to reduce the burden. So if you encounter a problem that is, for example, in step 3, when you are assessing the use, the safety due to the use of that chemical, then you don't need to perform a complete LCA without further addressing these issues. So this was our mindset when proposing this approach here. But of course, that people implementing the framework can do in parallel. Exactly, that's probably how we're going to do it for the case study. So this is also clarified that these steps are somehow, the way we thought about them was with this rationale, but if someone doing the assessment wants to do them all in parallel, it's okay. There's no restrictions on that. Then we receive many comments on the design phase and the principles and the connection with the innovation. So to recall again, the framework was had 2 components. So one component is where you would have some design principles that one can follow when designing a new chemical or material, or redesigning the process, the production process of existing one. And so these design principles were suggestions from our side that could be followed, but they are not part of the evaluation per se. So we would have a second part component that will then be exactly the evaluation of the sustainability, in which is comprised safety and environmental and social and economic aspects. So in this case, we were clarifying some issues on these design principles, and also we associate with them some indicators that can be used. But these are just suggestions from our side. So it can be that the developer, are the indicators that prefer to use. Then was also asked to stress the link between the design phase and circularity. And this we also did. And in particular, the interactive process between the design phase and the sustainability assessment. So this we tried to capitalize also on a recent document from CEFIC that illustrates the innovation process and how the SSBD sits. And in this case, we try to represent it in this scheme here, how the design principles and actions and indicators that we suggest get into the innovation process and the development of the technology to a higher TRLs. And the sustainability assessment should start at some point, not really in the beginning when you have things just on the paper, but this should accompany the development of the chemical or material to make sure that then in the end you don't identify issues later on the process. We must clarify that the objective of this work was not specifically on the innovation part, because we were mainly focused on how to define criteria. So what would be the aspect and how can we define a criteria for that aspect? For example, it's important to address climate change, and then how would be the performance of the new chemical regarding to this aspect. And so that's why in the first version, we didn't include much on this. And also now in this section, in this one, we address it, but recommending to other possible frameworks that exist, and also leaving it up to the developer to follow the innovation process that it has already implemented in his own company, if that is the case. And so this was regarding more generic comments that we received. And now I'm going to leave the floor to my colleague, Lucian, that is going in more a bit on detail on the steps.
I hope you can hear me. Confirm that.
Very well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we'll go a bit on details on this sustainability assessment steps and some comments that we received input in this direction, and the measures that we take to improve the report. And I must say also that we're really pleased to see the level of details and the constructive comments that were sent by the deadline. And of course, maybe we'll not manage to implement everything in the report, but in some of these topics will require additional discussions, additional workshops, and clarifications. But we hope we manage to include most of this input in the next version of the report. So there were many comments and also questions in order to clarify a bit on the subject of the assessment, the renaming of the steps, aim and definition of this assessment for each of these steps. Of course, Carla already mentioned that now we clarified regarding how these are recommended to be performed, how they can be performed. So of course, they can be performed in parallel as information becomes available along the life cycle of a chemical. And here indeed, there is a difference, and probably this was one of the confusions or unclarities that this framework, of course, it's a slightly differences between whether you assess an existing chemical with a lot of data already on the market, and those that are design in the design phase, where you can apply this framework. You can have data once you go through the life cycle of that chemical. Then we had this was figure 11 in the report, that we had some links with essential uses, and we skipped that because it created some misunderstandings there. And but we wanted to align a bit with ongoing initiatives in that sense. We had many concerns and questions and also ideas related with the data requirements. And then now we'll come back at the end of the presentation with this topic. And we included now a separate section on the data. But of course, this was not the main focus of the framework, to clarify everything on the data, because many things will be more clear in the next phases of the project. And as we go now into the case studies and the first testing of this framework, we already see how what are the issues and how some of them we can already clarify. And then again, for the application now, in the first case studies, we are looking to evaluate some existing chemicals, and also these steps we already see that we can already look for the data in parallel. So we don't wait for let's say for the LCA, we don't do it after we have the other type of data. So and then was already mentioned, we had already some reflections on the social and economic sustainability step, and then some further specific comments on each step. So we'll try to go over some of them. For the step 1, which is looking for the hazard, now we rename it, and it's in order to be more clear that it's related only with the hazard assessment. Other things that were other concerns were related with the cutoff criteria, with the hazard classifications. Again, this topic on the hazard versus risk, essential uses, information data requirements, and the use of new approach methodologies data, mixtures, and then a lot of specific cases which show kind of difficulties of applying to some of the some chemicals or materials, and then some questions on the evaluation procedure. Regarding the cutoff criteria, here we'll speak a bit more on this, because had a lot of input. It was a lot of support on the hazard-based cutoff criteria, but also at the same time we had also many concerns regarding them, as gives a lot of emphasis on the hazard properties instead of the risk. And you can see also some comments there. Now we try to clarify a bit on the text to come with additional information. We are, for this version of the report, we'll keep this cutoff criteria. We'll see whether refinements are further needed there. Instead, we replace this naming of non-SSBD with more clear levels. So now it's level 0, in order to align also with the other steps, and towards an implementation of a score for each step, which will give an overall SSBD scoring system. So that we hope to be a bit more clear on how this step 1 will be integrated with the other steps. But then, of course, this is a topic that perhaps needs further on additional discussions and a bit in-depth discussion on that, because to see exactly the implications of a hazard-based cutoff criteria on the overall assessment, and this we'll see also. We'll learn a lot during the next phases of the project. Again, there are some quite important differences whether this system is applied to a new or existing substance. Then, of course, in the next steps, we'll have the opportunity to fine-tuning and refine during the test phase of the project. Another topic, of course, was the hazard classification and the grouping of these hazard properties in different groups. And here we had a lot of concerns about the group of most harmful substances and the grouping, especially the respiratory sensitizations and other hazards that were included there. And then in the same time, another topic which was it's connected with the cutoff criteria. We had many comments whether this cutoff criteria should cover also the substances of concerns or not. And then a lot of ideas, and then we are still considering and we are discussing whether these hazards or the grouping of these hazards should be modified or not in the next version. But as I said, this is still we are consulting with the colleagues. But then we need to keep in mind that we need to align all these hazard properties or grouping. We need to align with the ongoing initiatives in the Commission, with the generic risk assessment, with the sustainable product initiative, and with essential uses and so forth. And then, of course, this needs to be refined. So the list that it is presented currently, it can be still discussed and further in-depth discussions and testing. And now I think this is the last slide on the first step on the hazard assessment, and I will give the floor to my colleague that will go to the step 2.
So, good afternoon, all. I hope that you can hear me well.
Very well, Iranzo.
Yes. So thank you very much, Luchan, for giving me the floor. I will go through the comments received for step 2 as well as for step 3 in the next coming slides. We received several comments and we have summarized or grouped them in the bullet points that you will see in the following slides. I have to tell you already that we also received comments related to the scoring system and the evaluation, but I think that these ones will be addressed later on. There is still a lot of to be discussed when, as my colleagues already mentioned several times, we run the case study and the testing phase. So with regards to step 2, one of the comments that we received related to this first bullet point, the methodology that we recommend, the aspects and the indicators and questioning or the assessment that it's performed in this step, because it looks like from the methodology that we are suggesting that it's basically a hazard assessment rather than a risk assessment, because it focused a lot on the hazard properties of the raw materials. So here the quick message or reply is the step 2 aims at performing the risk assessment at the production manufacturing process and not only hazard assessment. But here we have to bear in mind something that we have already mentioned and that we realize that we need to remind or remember quite often that the framework has a dual approach. In one hand, it sets the criteria for new chemicals materials at the innovation phase that are lacking of data at this moment when the framework is performed. And on the other hand, it also aims at supporting substitution of existing chemicals and materials that are already on the market, that they have to comply with the regulations in order to be placed on the market and therefore are rich on data. And between them, we can find a wide range of different cases. So for each of them, we have to think or at least consider that the approach can be different. The one that is proposed, the methodology that is proposed, it's a qualitative simplified method that it's already used in occupational health and safety, especially for these cases where the data availability is very little and it's very poor, the data that we have in hands. But that doesn't forbid the possibility of improving this assessment as the data availability becomes greater and full qualitative quantitative assessment can be performed. So in this case, for instance, for the substances already existing in the market and that are very rich in this data and that have been already performed under REACH and ORS legislations. So if we go to the next one, a little bit related with the one already mentioned. It's we receive a lot of comments saying that this assessment, this risk assessment, it's already done under REACH and the ORS legislation. And here, the quick reply or the easy reply is the intention is not to duplicate the work, but again, as it has been mentioned in the previous slide, and you will hear more and more often, it's that we have to take into account this duality of the approach of the framework. So one is to set the criteria for the new chemicals under design. At the innovation phase, for these chemicals, they don't have to comply with REACH and ORS legislation until they are placed on the market. So the criteria tries to already fulfill future needs to comply with these regulatory requirements in one hand. And then the framework also tries to support the substitution of existing chemicals already in the market that are already in compliance with the current regulatory requirements, REACH requirements. And therefore, the framework tries to benefit from all this information that it's already available for these substances. So it's not a duplication of the work, but using the information that has been used to comply with REACH and ORS to run the SSBD assessment. And the third slide as well, related in line with the previous comments, and based on this, we have received a lot of proposals for alternatives to the method proposed. And we, of course, are aware of the existence of these tools, and the intention is indeed to explore them during the case study and the testing phase in order to identify those ones that suit better for all the cases, or otherwise identify the correct approach for the specific cases. All this will be reflected in the new version of the report, hoping to clarify the concerns and explain them, and covering all the comments that we received. And now we can move to the step 3, that it will be a little bit short, because the comments that we receive are in the same line of the ones for step 2. So some confusion with regards to the terminology use, aspects and indicators, because are basically reflecting the method that it's recommended. But we also receive comments regarding that this is already done under REACH for those who know a little bit about what is required there related to the exposure scenarios. And again, here, the intention is to amend the text in order to address these concerns and these comments. And again, the intention is not to duplicate the work, but to benefit from it, that we know that these tools exist, and the intention is to explore the feasibility of these tools during the case study and the testing phase in order to identify and be able to recommend the most appropriate ones. And I think that that's all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Iran. So now we go into the step 4. That was on the environmental sustainability assessment. And here, also to recall, in this step, we suggest to perform a life cycle assessment. And so we received many comments concerning the limitations of performing such kind of studies due to the complexity, lack of data, the cost, and the lack of harmonized guidance for the application to chemicals. So we are aware of these points. In any case, we consider the life cycle assessment an essential tool for a comprehensive assessment along the life cycle of the chemicals and materials as requested in the strategy. There is existing guidance for conducting LCA, so LCA is not new, and along the years, many handbooks have been published, and the Commission has published also documentation, and more recently, the product environmental footprint method that is being recommended by the Commission to assess the environmental performance of products. So in there's also some guidance. We recognize that the SSBD in its application to low TRLs can face several challenges that this guidance might not reply to. But in any case, we could envisage the development of a specific guidance in the follow-up of this project with the experience gained in applying existing guidance to a case study in which it's being developed from lab scale, for example. And regarding the lack of data, unfortunately, this is the problem for many methodologies. And the Commission is aware of this and also planning to address this issue in future initiatives. So for example, calls for new projects under the Horizon program. So there's a lot of development on the use of, for example, in artificial intelligence. So these can be some things that are explored also to somehow fulfill this problem on the lack of data in the SSBD context. Then we were suggesting to use the product environmental footprint impact categories. That it contains 16 impact categories. And there was some comments regarding the differences in the robustness and reliability among these impact categories that are considered currently in the PEF method, and also that there are many, so that it's bringing a lot of burden to carry out an LCA. So as I said, this impact method is the one recommended by the Commission, and it's considered that this number of impact categories are essential for a good coverage of impacts and to avoid trade-offs between impact categories. And then when one is doing a case study, when one is doing an LCA, the data that needs to be collected will not differ very, very much from the, of course, that you just cover one impact category, maybe, but this is not enough to perform a comprehensive environmental impact, assessment. So we would still recommend the use of these 16, and then leaving also open the possibility to add other impact categories that are currently not there. For example, on biodiversity, that the method doesn't have a specific impact category, although it considers several that are the main drivers for biodiversity loss, such as land use or climate change. And we also would like to point out that the method, it transparently communicates this robustness and reliability of the impact categories. So it's everything very clear. So when applying these impact categories, one knows what's happening. And so we are also continuously assessing new methods in terms of impact covered, the regionalization of impacts, if it's operational, also in LCA softwares, and the underpinning modeling principles. So this is something that we have in mind and that we would like to also clarify in the document. Then we got some comments regarding the target setting. There was an agreement on this approach for absolute sustainability assessment. So in this case, we would move from this relative sustainability assessment to an absolute one. And it was pointed out that, however, these methods are not mature enough to be applied at the product level. Because if, for example, we adopt methods that are being developed by integrating in LCA, combining in LCA planetary boundary framework, then it's very hard to allocate the safe operational space to a specific chemical or material. So we really recognize that there is this issue, but methods are being developed, and so we will test them with these case studies that we will be developing, also to identify what are the further needs and to promote innovation and development of these methods, because we really believe that the safe and sustainable by design should move towards this direction. And we nevertheless recognize that if the application of these methods it's now a bit exploratory, we need to come up with a pragmatic approach. No? So in this case, we can follow what is doing currently in alternative assessment, in which the new chemical material to be assessed is compared with the incumbent one. But this is for sure not what we see how the SSBD should be working, because if what we compare with the one that is being replaced, the one that is being replaced might not have a good performance. So just by comparing with that one is not necessarily going to be the best in class as we want to have with the SSBD. And so this was the main points that we received comments regarding this step. There was also some issues, some comments regarding the overlap with step 3. And in this case, we clarified that the step 3, as Iranzo was presenting, it's focused on the use, on the direct exposure to the chemical, while here in step 4, it accounts for the emissions of all the chemicals along the supply chain. So, and then they are impacting the environment and human health via the environmental compartment. So it's a bit different. And so we will do a mapping of what are these different steps. First of what are the different steps using as underpinning data, and then also what is exactly the mechanism that is covered. So in the end, it will be clear when we finalize the application of these approaches to a case study, which so far was not done with us, no? So we will see what is eventually, if there is any overlapping, or understand better what each approach is capturing. Okay, so then regarding the evaluation procedure that we didn't have much developed at the time that we shared the report with you, but we had some thoughts on having the application of a scoring system. And this scoring system would allow to classify then or rank the chemicals and materials. So in this case, we could identify those that are best in class, those that need to be replaced. But there was some concerns about how we would aggregate the scores and requests for transparency and avoiding weighting. So there was also a point regarding the need to include data gaps and uncertainty in the scoring system. So we recognize this issue of the transparency that was also in our mind, but it was probably not very clear in the report, that once we conduct the assessment, the sustainability assessment, the first outcome can be, first we can have an adherence to the design principles, but this is more as an information. Then we will have the sustainability assessment, in which we can have a table, no, in each aspect and each indicator will have its result, and also, if applicable, in which stage of the supply chain that result applies to. So this allows us to have a very comprehensive view of the performance of the chemical, and also identify where is eventually performing not so well. and that needs to be improved. So for sure, this is something that we see as essential as coming out of this evaluation. But then, of course, that just looking at this, it's going to be difficult maybe to compare different alternatives or to see which one would be the best ones to invest in. So in this case, that's why we need this kind of like scoring system. And so we can reflect this in some kind of classification or some numerical value. So this is still to be decided. And we also recognized is that this issue with the data quality. So in parallel, we were thinking to have a data score that we could provide alongside with the score of the specific aspect being assessed. And this is something that for sure we will explore the implementation. There's also some suggestions of no data, no SSBD. So this is also can be something that we adopt. Then for the aggregation of the scores, we are having some consultation on having multi-criteria decision analysis by selecting appropriate methods that consider the characteristics of the framework. So their multi-criteria decision analysis has been applied in sustainability field in the last years, and we will test the application of some methods to identify which should be the best one in the case of in the context of this work. So as you see, we have a lot of ideas that we would like to test with this with the case studies, and only then we could then conclude on what would be the best approach to be further implemented. And this is regarding the evaluation procedure, an overview of the comments we received and what we are considering. And now I leave the floor to my colleague that will talk about the data issues.
Yes, as a follow-up of this slide on the evaluation procedure, because of course we also during the workshop we had several discussions about the data and the data availability and how to fill the data gaps and so on. Again, I need to underline that this was not under the main scope of the framework, but the framework we look more into the how to define criteria and so on, and then let's see it as a complete framework, more ideal framework, and then now we go into details, and then once we go to the specific cases, because we understand there are some specific types of materials that may have or may not have data, or we go to different situations where we can learn more about the data, what kind of data it is available, what kind of data needs to be generated, right? Of course, what we need to do, and we should do in this context of the framework, is to acknowledge that we need to have data quality criteria indeed in parallel with the criteria, and ensuring that this relevant and high quality data it will be used in the assessment, and we'll see later the implementation of that. We need to, of course, have links with the other data initiatives, so SSBD context should not be separated by other initiatives that are using perhaps similar data or are generating data for other purposes, but can be used in this context. Other systems, quality systems, and projects using similar systems, including here the FAIR, so adherence to the FAIR data principles on the find, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. Of course, we are looking, and then we added already in the report a separate section on the data. So and also some reference to adaptation or implementation of data quality system and models already in place. So that's already something that we included in the framework. But as I said, it's not it will be not the main scope of the framework, but to cover everything and to also demonstrate. But the demonstration it will be in the next phases of the project. Another topic that we discussed in the workshop, and also it was a placeholder in the previous version of the report. It was the data generated by alternative to animal testing, so the new approach methodologies, and then we also added some more details now in the new version of the project. If we go to the next slide. So as an example on data generated using NAMs, of course, we underline now that in this context of the SSBD framework, the NAMs and the data generated with non-animal methods are very important. But of course, the SSBD framework should be seen as a tool to support and promote the NAMs. And then also in the same time, the concept, the SSBD, should be a beneficiary of any developments in this area, right? And then the NAMs are important to guide the process of when a new substance is developed, and they are really helpful. They will be helpful at the early stages of the when the substance is developed. Then, if you see in the image in the right, we are is the first version of a proposal of a tier approach. How this kind of data from NAMs can be used in this context, depending whether it's a new chemical or an existing chemical. And again, we go to the same topic that here are these two different situations where an existing chemical, you might have already a lot of data, whether the chemical and the substance is already registered, you'll have a lot of data already in the regulatory databases, and you can use that. And then when there are data gaps, you can add additional data from other information sources available, including any existing NAMs information. While for a new chemical, when you start designing a new chemical, the first data available will be from modeling tools, from in vitro methods and so forth, until you arrive to the point where you'll have available data from the regulatory dossiers, let's say. So it will be a bit different, this perspective. So I think with this, it was the last slide of the presentation. We want to thank again to our experts that they help us along the development of this framework, also to address some of these comments that we received in the last weeks. And with this, I think I give the floor back to the chair of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear colleagues in the Joint Research Center, for this extensive presentation and giving feedback really step by step. For me, extremely helpful that this has been done, and also to show how things are actually evolving. I see now there are already questions in the chat box. If more would like to take the floor, either please raise your hand or indicate with your name you would like to take the floor. Whilst reflecting whether you have questions, I noted 4 questions, and I would like to link the question by Martin Wimmer and by Antje Eichler together. This is actually as a link between this discussion as a discussion on REACH. Antje Eichler has been more specific in its chat box comment. There I will hand over to Sophie Naraga from my team. Then we had a question from Mandy Vayet on step 1, the hazard step, and the table 3. There I need colleagues from the Joint Research Center that they come onto this. This was by Mandy Vayet. Then we had a question on the scope. This was raised by Ann-Christine Larsen, whether nanomaterials and microplastics are within the scope of this framework. And we had that I leave also to the colleagues of the Joint Research Center. And then we had a discussion, what is actually under step 4, the incentive for using recycled or recyclable materials. Is waste prevention actually taken into account, yes or no? And that I would like also to hand over to colleagues in the Joint Research Center. So I would suggest now that Sophie, you are with us?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Good. So a very short or concrete reply to the question about how this relates to the REACH and the new eco-design regulation. First of all, again, let me repeat that the SSBD framework operates in the research and innovation landscape. It's not a regulatory action. And that already different, which means that we can also be more ambitious. We can try out new things. We can try to push the boundaries a little bit further than what you do under the regulatory actions. So this difference is really important. Now, of course, if we can show from the research and innovation perspective that this framework is operational, that we can assess these kind of things, that we have the data, that we can, that it is workable, it is a good example, and it can inspire what regulations can then be taken up. But regulations have their own life cycle, their own amendment methods, their own processes of taking up new ideas or being changed. And that is not at all at the discussion at this moment. We first need really to test the SSBD framework. So there is a link that we all know, as Jürgen nicely said in the beginning of this meeting. We do all collaborate, we do coordinate, we do talk to each other, we know what is going on in the other initiatives, but there is a difference between something which goes into regulation and something which is still operating in the research and innovation landscape. So I hope that replies to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Can I turn now to the colleagues from the Joint Research? Yeah, Sophie,
yeah,
yes.
No, maybe just I was just scrolling down to the second question. Of course, if something has been assessed in REACH, you can use the same data and the evaluation you have done in order to submit it to REACH also for your SSBD. So you have done it already, and then you need to see if there are additional layers to add, but you don't have to start all over again when you then apply the SSBD framework. That is.
Yeah, I see the question by Christoph Walter, if I'm not correct. Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so no duplication compared to REACH. That's in essence the message. Okay, I'm looking now to the colleagues from the Joint Research Center who is taking which question. The first one is about step 1, the hazard, the table 3. That was done by Mandy Veillet, and you've seen that also Christoph Walter has raised a similar question. Who will take that question?
I will try to answer it, and maybe my colleagues will complete if needed. Yeah, let me just repeat maybe the question for those that are watching on YouTube, so they don't see the comments. So the question is whether regarding table 3 of this checklist of hazard properties, whether this list implies that every new substance must be tested for every hazard endpoint listed, regardless of the intended tonnage. And or the substances that still testing according to the tonnage, and then only the relevant endpoints from this checklist are assessed. So this is a good question, but at the moment in the framework, we don't take in consideration this kind of variability, like differences, or because we are already looking to so we try to include in the framework as many aspects as possible, and from all these dimensions, from the safety to the sustainability, and then we are talking here about the hazard properties, right? And then we have the cases of new substances, we have the cases of existing ones, but we are not this is not addressing the framework, doesn't recommend anything that connects to the tonnage as REACH does, right? So, and then it will be a very interesting exercise, this kind of case where we have this information requirements and data requirements, right? Table 3, and it will be other tables. Each of these steps will have a separate table, right? And then when we go through the case studies and we discover that there is a data gaps because some of this, it will be probably some substances that will have more complete data and others not, right? And then the reason why is the data gaps is because it was not requested by the probably if we are using the regulatory data, probably because it was not requested because of the tonnage. But then we go further and then we try to fill these data gaps with additional data. So it will be, indeed, it's not covered, but it will be, it's an interesting point. And then maybe I can also answer to the other question, a short one, whether the nanomaterials and microplastic are included in the scopes, and for sure nanomaterials, yes. Then we hope to have also some cases with on the nanomaterials. This will require additional criteria because some materials, they have specific properties which are not, or the hazards are derived from different characteristic of these materials, which are not probably yet covered by the framework, but they should be in, and we should also test those kind of cases. Yes.
Good. Thank you, Lucian. Then the next question is about step 4 and the use of recycled and recyclable materials, waste prevention. Who can take this question?
I can take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
So the question says that it's pointing out that within the 16 impact categories, there's not an incentive for using recycled materials or resources, and that the waste prevention is totally left out by the approach. I would like to clarify that this is not exactly like this. So in these design principles that I was mentioning, that are suggestions to be followed by the developer, when developing a new chemical material, the waste prevention is one of those principles. So there is decisions that a developer can take when designing the new chemical, and many of these principles are related to the waste prevention and the efficiency of the process and all these things. What is important to have in mind is that the use of renewable material or recycled material doesn't necessarily bring benefits in terms of impacts. And this is why one developer can adhere to these guiding principles, but then there's the need to develop the LCA with the impact categories to really see what are the benefits of following those principles. So in this sense, the approach covers the waste prevention and promotes practices that go towards this direction. And then the benefits are then assessed with the sustainability assessment step.
Thank you, Carla. Now I have another question in the chat box, which is more for you, Sirenella. I see the name Dan. Maybe the colleague who has raised this could briefly introduce him herself, and then maybe ask the question. It's about, I read it, it would be good to hear a bit more about the plans for step 5. Mrs. Sala indicated that the EC is reflecting on how to address this step, but given the importance of the topic for SSBD and the number of comments received, it would be helpful to know how this will be. Now, can I ask first a question? Who is actually the person who's asking the question? Dan. It's a bit difficult to identify who's behind it.
Yes, sorry, Jürgen. It's Dan here. Sorry, I put it in the chat. It's Daniel Schubiers, and I'm director of DPF. It's a consultancy for responsible innovation.
Okay, very clear. No, it's all fine. Very clear. Okay, now we know, Sirenella, do you want to come back to this on step 5?
Yes, actually that was presented by Carla, the answer, so maybe she can give more
Carla,
precise
Carla, go ahead.
point. Yes, In general, there are elements on which we are reflecting and that she was mentioning.
Yes, the step 5, which is socioeconomic aspects that we received. I mean, in our report and the framework, this step is considered. It's part of the framework, but we were not providing how to define criteria for this specific step because it was not in the scope of the work that we had to do. Then we received many comments saying that this should be part of the framework. It's already part of the framework, but that they will also like to see how then to implement aspects and criteria in these areas, right? So internally in the commission, this is being discussed. And I cannot inform anything else now at this point that we will come up with an agreed decision regarding to this point, but it's out of the GRC league at this point to say more about it. But from our side, it's part of the framework. It's just we need to decide all together if we should provide some aspects and criteria for those domains.
Thank you, Carla. So it's a point which will be taken up and we have to look into. So I see also further comments on this. Happy to see them. Thanks, Daniel Scobis. Then I see a question by Mark Schneider, which I'm going to read out. It's again the hazard step, the table 3. Regarding table 3, thus no thresholds in the final product, etc., depending on the age range of the substances. Oh, it goes, okay. Is it Lucian who will take it up again? The question from Mark.
Trying to, yeah, I guess so. I will take it. I'm trying to understand where is this question.
Or do you maybe, Mark Schneider, could you briefly introduce the question? Mark Schneider.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. So thank you very much. So just I wanted to clarify for the step 1, you know, you have this criticality of substances depending on the age phase, and then you have this stepwise approach. And what I wanted to understand, if this evaluation, you know, if you have such a substance in a final product, I would expect this is linked to certain amount, you know, and I wanted to know, are there any thresholds which then lead to the, or which somehow has an influence on this evaluation? Because if it's only, let's say, parts of, you know, very low amounts, ppm, or if it's in a higher amount, I would expect that would have an impact on the result.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to be sure, I think you are not talking about mixtures, right? Like the individual chemicals, and they are in amount of ppms in sort of uses or so on, right? And perhaps from a hazard point of view, yeah, that's whether that has a hazardous properties or not, that will be covered, of course, in the first phase and so on. Whether this goes in a further use and the concentration will be in a let's say low amount, and then will be covered by this, let's say, a safe use, right? So that's why we have this kind of two steps that we look into from two different angles into this. But I don't know if my colleagues wants to complete this, and maybe I.
Yeah, it's not very clear neither for me what's the question really what tries to address, because in the framework, if we are assessing the substance and this substance is above this cutoff criteria, that it's the, I mean, and especially addressing new substances, that will be the cutoff criteria to consider that this substance doesn't pass the safety first step assessment. But we are talking here about the CMR that at 0.1% as an impurity in a substance. This is something that in REACH and the REACH is considered, but here taking into account the CLP classification threshold values, I think if I remember correctly, that even if it's an impurity 0.1% in the overall substance, the substance itself is considered CMR 1A and 1B as well. So in this case, this substance with this impurity wouldn't pass the SSBD step 1 criterion either. I hope that I understood it correctly.
Thank you,
It's clear.
Joran.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joran. So we have clearly distinguished what should be REACH, what should we do here. So that's in essence a question. Yeah. Okay. Good. So I see also a comment from Mark Schneider. Are there any other questions? I'm looking here into the chat box. No. Oh, wow. So the colleagues from the joint researcher. There is a question. I see a question by Julien Lau, Airbus, to everyone. What about substances with SELs in that case? Do you see the question? Who wants to take it, Iranzu or Carla?
Yeah, we are entering into the technicalities, and I don't like to answer questions that I don't first check. But yeah, if we are talking about in this first step about considering the hazard classes of these substances with or without their impurities according to the CLP rules, that I guess that in this case these specific concentration limits should be taken into account as well. But we will try to address it as much as possible. I guess that in the text, if it's not clear enough.
Okay, thank you. There is then also a question by Marco Susnik. Can I hand over to you if you can briefly show yourself at the camera and ask the question on what you heard? Mark Susnik, please.
So thank you. I'm representing SME United and my camera is broken, so I'm sorry I can't turn it on. But I would have two remarks in the question. First, you were mentioning that the OSH legislation is very much focused on substances that are newly placed on the market, similar to REACH, but I think that the OSH legislation is going much further. So the OSH legislation is also in general covering also uses and not only substances. So the scope there is much bigger, and I think that plays also a very important role in relation then to do the assessment of the safe part. And the second thing, which to a certain extent has been already discussed, and this is the what Sophie I think said, that basically you can take over the REACH assessment. And on the other hand, I think Lucie has said that well, you haven't thought totally through in relation to the tire-to approach of REACH. So basically there indeed you have 4 scenarios within REACH. Which assessment on the REACH do you mean? The 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100,000, over 1,000? And that plays a very important role in matter of costs, in particular, because within REACH, the tiered approach on the tonnages has been introduced also to support SMEs to be able to enter into this regulatory scheme. So you have to be aware that SMEs, and this is also where I'm coming from, SME United is the European Social Partner for SMEs, will have a hard time if everything would have to be assessed according to REACH with the scenario over 1,000 tons in matter of safety. And in this relation of data collection, I would have a question, because you were talking about artificial intelligence for data gathering. And very often the problem is with data in relation to environmental footprints and so on, is that actually data is not available. So in our view, it would be also kind of very, there would be a problem generating data that is not there. So you really have to go there, you have to test, perform tests, you have to make studies. So that's kind of how I see it. But have you thought about it a bit more in detail when you say you could use artificial intelligence? What do you mean with that? What would be some concrete examples when you talk about using artificial intelligence, would be quite curious about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I see additional questions are coming in, but I think at a certain time I will also close the list. Before I hand over to the colleagues from the Joint Research Center on this question by Marco, let me underline the plan on SSBD is not to make them mandatory. Really take this from home. And if I have to use the drums and go through the streets until people understand it, we don't want to make it mandatory. So to talk about additional costs, burden, etc., is really, no, this is not our plan. It is a voluntary instrument we are looking for, and it was explained. Sorry for insisting, but it's really important. Yeah, that you all take this home, and I will come back to this. Whom from the colleagues of the Joint Research Center would like to take the question on data? Because there is an additional one also from Mandy Vayet. It is on the penultimate slide on the data generated using NAMs. Is there a plan or a desire to standardize the NAMs which could be used by industry to assess substances early on in the design phase? Well, I'm not sure whether this is for the Joint Research Center report, but if there's anything on your side, let us know. And if Sophie Noriga wants to come in, feel free to come in as well. Okay, over to the Joint Research Center on Marco's question, and also on the question on NAMs and data.
So maybe I can start regarding this artificial intelligence. So as Sophie said, let's also keep in mind that aside of not being a regulatory action here, it's on the space of research and innovation. And we have to be a bit, so in this sense, we understand these points that you raise, and they're for sure very, very valid. But in this arena of research and innovation, we can allow ourselves to dream a bit and also foresee what would be, where the direction of research and innovation to go. So this to say that there's recently publication of, let's say, cutting edge research on the use of these new tools to generate data. And this is something that can be further explored. So we can imagine something like QSR models that can be applied to generate data, for example, for inventories. So could this be possible? Could we create a learning set that then will generate data? So there's many, I cannot go into the details because it's not my area, but we have read several publications in this direction, and we believe that this is where the future development should go for. So, and I guess this connects a bit with also with the use of the NAMs, that it's a field in research, and so that's why we are also considering it here. So, but I give the floor to my colleague.
Yeah, on this topic, because maybe we answer to this before we go to the others. Of the question of Mandy Violet, and then also related with the question of Leah Hernandez on what kind of information, if regulatory relevant information is not yet there and so on. Of course, in this kind of situation, and you should see it as a still an exploratory framework, right? Where we will try to use as I presented in my slide, this kind of tier approach. But again, whether this information is already available from a regulatory database, that will be used. But then we should go beyond that, right? And to use additional data, whether the second layer or the second tier is from validated test in vitro methods or other more standardized methods. But then also we can go even further and then add additional information there. However, it's not the role of the framework to work towards this standardization of the NAMs, and because that's other projects and big projects we working towards that in other initiatives. Whether SSBD context, SSBD approach will be will push towards that. That's we'll be very happy to do that. But again, we like to be a beneficiary of all these developments in this area and use the data from the NAMs as much as possible.
Thank you, Lucian. Okay, you see the questions are coming. We will take them one by one as far as we can. I see there's another one. Could you please further elaborate on how mixtures are considered within the SSPD framework? I think, was it Lucian who has mentioned? I think you have mentioned it, Luciana. It's a question about mixtures. It's a question by Bar. Yes, please.
I can take it, although it was actually Carla, the one that mentioned it shortly. But yeah, we received this comment because there is a lot of confusion with regards to as well the terminology and where this framework can be used. And as it is defined, the framework is meant to be used or to address chemicals, meaning substances and mixtures and materials. So we know that the supply chain of the chemicals is very complex, and we will learn a lot when we run the case study and in the testing phase. But for the time being, we see like there are different possibilities, and it's up to the specific cases where we will need to see how to address it. So one, it's mixture can be considered a chemical, and it's the objective of the assessment of the framework. A mixture, it's also a combination of substances, so it could be as well considered as the assessment of the different components of the mixture. Yeah, I mean the combination of the different assessment of the components of the mixture. And then we also know that the mixture is the result of one of the uses of the substance that it's assessed. So in this case, it could be considered as the use in step 3 of the assessment of the framework. So we know that there are different possibilities, and as I said, during the case study and the testing phase, I think that we will learn more about the complexity of the mixtures, and especially mixtures in mixtures, and we hopefully will be able to give a clear answer to that question.
Thank you. And yeah, I should have given the floor to you, Carla, because you explained it well. Thanks a lot, Iransu. Okay, there's a question from Cefik, but which induces me actually to say that we do not plan a requirement for companies. I'm really going to insist, because I see it, on which level do you need to do the hazard assessment? This is reach language for me. We are here really on developing criteria, bringing safety and sustainability together. So the question, I read it out now by Anders, is in case of reactive substances, on which level do you need to do the hazard assessment, step 1, on all raw materials prior to a reaction or on the final products after the reaction? Not sure you are able to answer the question at this stage, because we will come to the use cases in please. Who wants to take this question, if possible?
So actually, you do it in both cases. Step 1 will address the hazards of the product after the reaction, and step 2 will assess the hazards of the raw materials prior to the reaction. Okay, good. Thank you, Iransu. Then there is a question by Sophie Rake. If SSPD is not mandatory nor regulatory, how is it supposed to be linked to SPI, which is a mandatory regulation? Well, first of all, the SPI is a proposal by the Commission. It's not yet mandatory. Yeah? It's currently broadly debated. And it's an instrument which is focusing on the product. We are focusing on the chemicals and the materials. And under the SPI, you actually need, once there's an agreement by Council and the European Parliament on this initiative, you need in future delegated acts identifying a product, and only then this becomes relevant. And if it becomes relevant, I don't know. Sophie, you would like to take over, or should I carry on? Sophie?
Yeah, I can take over. I think you almost replied. So the SPI is really focusing on the product as such, where going back to the very simple example we have, the SPI will focus on your computer. What SSPD is looking at is the flame retardant in your computer. So what is the flame retardant posing, as risk for sustainability as a part of your computer. The SPI is looking at the entirety of your computer. So the two are linked. And I think the experience we can acquire with applying the SSBD framework in the research and innovation landscape will provide data, will provide information, which can then also be used to whatever decision is made on the SPI to assess the product sustainability.
Okay. And if I may add, Sophie, for this, we need not only the framework, we need to know the chemicals to be used. We need to have criteria for such chemicals. So we are really still far away from this. Should all be mandatory. I really would like to insist on it, because the framework should help us to develop the criteria for also for chemicals later on. Which chemicals can you use in a computer? Will the computer be subject to the SPI initiative? I think these are a bit too hypothetical question. Of course, it should be used for the SSBD criteria for the future, and it should not become a stumbling block. But as I said, it should help when it comes to the SPI initiative. I hope this sheds a bit some more light on this. Okay, then I see a comment, the German UBA report on SSBD results and proposing a remove for fibers under reach. So we see a connection to regulatory requirements more or less. I see. What if the product is a mixture of chemicals? Well, don't know. Does anybody wants to take still this question? I'm a bit, it's from Kartikuma Sepe. And then with this, I think looking here. Does anybody wants to take this question?
Yeah, I can take it as well. As it was mentioned before, I think that the mixture topic is a very burning one. For now, the approach of the framework is a very simple one, where we consider a very simple supply chain. And now I think that with the case studies, we will need, or the case study and the testing phase, we will need to learn more about the complexity of the supply chains and where the assessment can start and when it has to be end. Because as it has been mentioned, the framework doesn't cover the products, but we know that sometimes it's a very thin line, the one that makes the difference between chemicals and products. So that's something that we learn about during this testing phase.
Good. I take now the last question from Ronald van den Bosch. But what is the hazards? Actually, Ronald, can you actually explain the question? Because in the written text, I don't really understand it.
You said, yeah, because it was about the previous discussion about a reaction. So if you take the starting materials and then you look to the hazard, now then you have a reaction and you look to the new products and what are the hazards. But typically you should also look to risks. Yeah. So because when you have a hazard, that doesn't mean you have a risk. Irrespective of the chemical, whether it's a mixture, yes or no, that doesn't matter. But so because looking only to hazard is, I think, it's a bit, yeah, then it's not complete, call it like that. Yeah.
Okay,
you're right. I mean, I can take this quickly. I mean, this is a complex discussion, and we receive also a lot of comments on that. But basically, a simple answer will be there, because in this kind of situations, if it's a hazardous, hazard properties will get like a low score, for example, in the hazard, and then if there is a safe use, we'll have a higher score in the step 3, which step 3 deals with this risk assessment during the use. So this will be the kind of the very quick answer to that. Of course, when we go into details and the specific cases and so on, that this discussion can be more complex than that. But this is the first. This is the first reaction. Yeah.
Now that will there be the same weighing of the hazard assessment versus the use assessment?
Good question, and I think we are not yet able to answer to that. But we'll find the best solutions there. But we need more time on more testing phases, more testing for that to come back to that.
Okay.
But this is a hot topic that we need to, of course, still discuss. Yeah.
And we will have a proper workshop on use cases in autumn coming up. Good. I suggest now, thanks for all the questions, which puts all the challenges on the table. And let me thank, first of all, to the colleagues of the Joint Research Center who made really a big effort, initially not foreseen, to answer as many questions as possible. Before we conclude now, I would like to move on our agenda. This is actually Amadine Joannes from DG Grow. Amadine, are you with us? Oh, I see you.
Here, yes. Can you see me?
Okay, I can see you and I can hear you, Amadine. I think you would like to give now additional information about the transition pathway, also illustrating what is your work and also maybe answering questions on the complementarity. Yeah, okay, over to you. This is really a point of information here for all the stakeholders, and we have 117, not too bad. Good, over to you.
Many thanks, and many thanks for having me. I will just quickly present what we've been doing on the transition pathway for chemicals. So just a quick overview on why we're having this is because the EU chemical industry, actually Europe is the second largest chemical producer in the world with 499 euros of billions of sales in 2020. It's also the fourth largest chemical producer with 7% of EU manufacturing turnover, and which impacts enormously highly skilled jobs within the EU. And it's also the second largest research and innovation investor in the world with 9.4 billion euros. So it's actually an industry which has a lot of direct CO2 emissions, but also can contribute. So there is here a double action that the chemical industry can take, because it can on one side reduce its greenhouse emissions and CO2 emissions, but also contribute to new development of new chemicals and innovations, and development of new products which are much more greener and would help with the green and digital transition. So up. So right now, the chemical industry is actually having a landscape which is very active and changing tremendously. So there is the climate and energy targets that you probably already know, which has a lot of different initiatives and new directives that the chemical industry has to face. There is the chemical strategy for sustainability, which include the safe and sustainable by design development. There is also resilience. I mean, the chemical industry is currently facing very important geopolitical changes. And as you know, it's very dependent on natural gas, and the geopolitical context makes it a bit difficult. And among all of this, there is also the digitalization. So the chemical industry has a lot going on, and this is why we're working on a transition pathway. And this was based on the update of the 2021 industrial strategy. So this update actually asked to develop transition pathways for ecosystem. So there has been already a transition pathway for tourism, which has been developed. And the chemicals are part of the energy industry intensive ecosystems. So what we're asked to do here is to actually co-create jointly with industries and stakeholders transition pathways to identify actions which are needed to achieve the green transition, and giving a better understanding of the scale, benefits, and conditions required. So as part of the energy intensive industry ecosystem, there has been a strong interest from the chemical sector in particular to have a sectorial transition pathway. So we have started to launch co-creation process on the industry day. So it was on the 9th of February 2022, so of this year. And we've had already 2 stakeholders meetings, and we've launched our first draft, and we're waiting for comments right now on the first draft of this transition pathway. So just to show you a bit how we're doing it, we're following a blueprint for transition pathway for all ecosystems. This is also the blueprint that the tourism transition pathway has followed. So there is 7 different building blocks normally, and we added one specifically for the chemical industry, which is access to energy and feedstock. under these building blocks, you see that there is also research and innovation, techniques and technological solutions. So here, the safe and sustainable by design actually has a strong importance. So this is the blueprint, and the way we followed it is that we identified topics which are relevant for the chemical sector, for the chemical industry, under each building block. So if you see, if you look quickly, so I won't go too much into details, but on investment and funding, there is a topic which is only about research and innovation, funding for safe and sustainable chemical innovations. So we can find safe and sustainable by design criteria and framework, which will be a tool actually in achieving this transition, and is often put in terms of actions within our transition pathway. And so the structure we have followed, we just have an introduction where we talk about the context and introduce what are the objectives. So we need to know where we are going for the chemical industry. So what are the objectives that are impacting the chemical sector, the chemical industry. We followed the matrix, which I presented there's 8 different building blocks. And under each building block, we have the topics. And under each topics, we identified actions which could be done by industry and by EU member states in order to move forward with this transition. And we identified them in the short term, medium, and long term in order to also have some kind of time frame, and but afterwards have a prioritization of the actions. So what do we need to do tomorrow? What short-term actions does the industry has to do? What short-term actions does the EU has to do, or member states? And that way we would have a kind of a roadmap and a timeline on what has to be done in order to achieve this transition. So just a bit of the timeline and process. So this is what we have done so far. So we had the industry days, we had a kickoff meeting, then we had first outline, second meeting with stakeholders, and we managed to send a first draft on the 5th of April. We had last week a third meeting with stakeholders, where we just discussed the first draft and had comments. We're still waiting for comments at the moment, and we should be able to send a second draft around the 7th of June. And the next steps is that we will be presenting our work to the high-level roundtable on the 18th of May, just a short presentation. We will also consult, so we have a task force which is only on transition pathway in the industrial forum, so we will also consult them at that time, and we will have a final 4th meeting with stakeholders on the 20th of June to discuss this second draft in order to have almost a finalized version during the summer, because we aim to adopt and publish around October. So the process is quite fast, but we're really working hard, and we're also working hard with other DGs within the Commission in order to streamline our activities and make sure that safe and sustainable by design is represented, and how does it fit and interlock with all the actions we have planned. So if you have any questions, I don't know whether we would have time during this presentation, but feel free to also contact us. We have a functional mailbox just for the chemical transition pathway. So feel free to send us an email to the address that you have here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amadine, for giving this overview. I think we are working very closely with DG Grow for 2 reasons. These are 2 parallel work streams, and we wanted to signal this to all of you, to the 115 participants and those who watch to the YouTube video, but also that comments you are making to each of us will not get lost, and we will really closely align it. There shouldn't be any worry in this regard. Are there any questions to the speaker now, to Amadine? I'm looking into the chat box. No, that seems not to be the case. Okay, the PowerPoint presentations can be shared with all the participants. I will do this. Okay, then Amadine, if I don't see anybody else raising their hands, no. I'm just looking here. No. Okay, good. Amadine, many thanks. So it seems to be clear, and we will stay also in touch in this regard. Alexandra, I'm getting here a question. Will the effect to downstream user industry also considered? That's a question, I suppose, to the previous presentation, also from the Joint Research Center. Is there anybody from the GRC with us?
We are here, but I'm not sure this question is for us. It's for us. Sorry.
I'm actually seeing in the chat there is a question on the 2 articles by Joel Tickner and
these have been shared. The reference to Joel Tickner. Okay, Amadine, do you want to try to give it a try to this question? Will the effect to downstream user industries also be considered? I suppose it's linked to the transition pathways.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so just on the first article, we are also in contact with Joel Tickner, so we're having separate also meetings with them because I think they have relevant information. So we're considering this. On the downstream user industry, so we're looking at the entire supply chain, obviously, and this is also why we have involved downstream user associations as well inside of our meetings. There is, for instance, the paint association, the detergents, because of course they will have an effect and they will be affected on this. So we're trying to look at all of this, but of course we cannot be too detailed into one downstream user industry because chemicals touch upon almost every industry. So we're of course looking at the supply chain, but in a reasonably high level way.
Okay, thank you. Good. I think then we are coming nearly to an end of this 2 hours webinar. Many thanks, Amadine. Then it's apparently up to me to make the concluding remarks. Yes. Okay. Many thanks to all those who participated, who asked questions, and I hope we could answer many more questions than in the past, and that also what the colleagues of the Joint Research Center have presented to you shows to you how serious we take up all the comments made in this regard. The Joint Research Center will now, in the coming weeks and months, finalize their report. The next important step, however, will be that in autumn, we will, I think, have another workshop on case studies. I hear lots of questions about what's the link to REACH, what's the link to the SPI. Well, actually, we are setting here a framework for developing criteria. And the framework needs to be filled with concrete use cases, with concrete examples. And for this reason, I think together with the colleagues from the Joint Research Center, we will organize a workshop and future use cases. So it's for us like a testing phase, because do not forget one thing. We're bringing here for the first time really together safety and sustainability. We see here many questions related to safety and what's the link to REACH, but we are bringing together safety and sustainability. So that's an important point for me. We have also, and that I would like to underline. So whatever the Commission is going to do, it will not become a set of binding criteria or framework. It will be highly relevant for the researchers, because researchers need urgently a framework when it comes to new chemicals and new novel materials, that we can really start with an agenda that is safe and sustainable by design. This is an ongoing and parallel work stream under the work program for Horizon Europe, for which should be agreed before the end of this year. On the framework for safe and sustainable by design, we have received your comments today. We will look at them again. We saved them also here in the chat box. We will continue the discussions with the Joint Research Center. So apart from a workshop on use cases, future use cases, to test this, we start now consolidating our position. As I said, we are not envisaging this year or for the coming years any mandatory instruments. It goes too fast, too quick, and it will not work. What we are currently envisaging is to summarize the debate. and then have really a Commission reaction, which should come in autumn, late autumn, maybe October, and also to have like often, yeah, I would call it an actionable framework. An actionable framework means we should speak about a recommendation, what we expect from stakeholders to do to apply this framework. When they start applying this framework, we will need a lot of feedback from stakeholders, how such a framework works and where it needs to be adjusted, because it needs to be translated to chemicals, to mixtures, and to others as well. So we need to have a testing phase. We had now in very administrative terms, we had in mind so far to actually just present the facts in a so-called staff working document on October. And I must say, in the light of the reactions from the two workshops, I'm personally much more inclined actually to go for a Commission recommendation, a European Commission recommendation, so that we are very clear. We are recommending a framework. We're expecting a feedback loop, and it should be like best practice for the front runners. And we should be really clear about this and envisage via such a Commission recommendation also concrete actions. If you have further questions to us, we have put in place the network under our website where you have already registered, where you can ask questions. I see there's a question, how and when the selection of the case studies will be performed. There's a question from Ifra, from Aurélie Pirichet. Sophie, you would like to answer this question and then I conclude.
Well, there are the first case studies which will now be worked on by the GRC, and I think there we have already shared in the previous meeting the 3 different options we are looking at, and there was a call for data on these 3 different case studies, and we are now, so the GRC is looking at, having different discussions with the different industry who has this data and how we can work together, and will then develop one of them. But then, as Jürgen said, we're going into a wider testing phase also once we publish the final framework. And I think here we invite everybody who would like to test it and run it to actually engage in it and to report back to us, the experience with applying the framework. So it's not because you're not part of the first 3 that we will not count on your experience and your engagement in the process afterwards.
No, I think if I can emphasize the message, the engagement should continue, because now we need to do case studies. And if you allow me, some questions actually popping up today are hinting at case studies. So we need to test this, the frameworks, the 5 steps, which we indicated to you. And then start seeing how this evolves and whether the framework is at the end fit for purpose for setting the criteria. Good. Many thanks for your participation today. We will stay in touch with you within the network we have set up, and we will also let you know in due course when the report by the joint research study will be made public and which instrument we would like to use to take this debate further, be it a Commission recommendation or something else. As I said, I'm personally inclined to go for a Commission recommendation, but that we will discuss in the coming weeks. Conclusion at the end, I think your contributions have been very valuable and very helpful for us to shape this agenda. Many thanks for your attention today. And let me conclude maybe with a nice applause to our speakers from the Joint Research Center. And if they're still there, open up their cameras, that would actually be nice. Serenella, Carla, Lucia, Irenzo. Are they all there? Oh, Carla, you're the last one.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. So you see the nice applause, and Irenzo, thanks a lot for answering all the questions and for making and underline this additional effort, which was not foreseen on the 22nd of March, but we felt it was really, really important. So many thanks in particular to you and also to Amadine from DG Grow. Dear colleagues, let's stay in touch and have still a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lucia. No? Bye-bye.